Smoke hangs low over the water. Cannon fire echoes through the harbor. Ships burn at anchor, their crews trapped between fire and sea. Somewhere in the chaos, a signal flag is raised. Withdraw. On the flagship HMS Elephant, Horatio Nelson lifts his telescope. He presses it to his blind eye. I do not see the signal. In that moment, a battle, a political crisis, and Nelson's career all balance on a single decision. By 1801, Europe had been at war for nearly a decade. The French Revolution had turned into a struggle for dominance, and Napoleon Bonaparte was winning it on land. Britain could not stop French armies marching across Europe. What it could do was control the sea. The Royal Navy was Britain's lifeline and its greatest weapon. Through blockade, it strangled French trade and starved Napoleon of resources. But that strategy depended on one controversial assumption, that Britain had the right to stop and search neutral ships. Neutral powers disagreed. Russia, Sweden, Denmark, and Prussia had no love for France, but they had even less patience for British interference. Under Tsar Paul of Russia, they formed the League of Armed Neutrality. On paper, it was defensive. In practice, it threatened Britain's entire war strategy. If the Baltic closed to British ships, Britain would lose access to timber, pitch, and naval stores. Worse, combined neutral fleets could challenge British control at sea. From Britain's point of view, waiting was the most dangerous option. London chose force over diplomacy. The logic was cold and simple. Break the League before it hardens. Hit the weakest member first. That target was Denmark. A fleet was sent to Copenhagen under Admiral Sir Hyde Parker, a cautious commander chosen for seniority and experience, not aggression. His second-in-command was the opposite, Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. Nelson understood incentives better than anyone in the fleet. Delay favored the Danes. Every day meant more guns mounted, more crews trained, more allies ready. He urged immediate attack. Parker hesitated. Wind, weather, and indecision slowed the British advance. When the fleet finally reached Copenhagen, the Danish defenses were far stronger than they would have been weeks earlier. This was the first unintended consequence. Delay had turned a manageable operation into a deadly gamble. Copenhagen could not be taken from the sea in open battle. The Danish fleet was anchored along a narrow channel called King's Deep, supported by shore batteries and the massive Trekroner fort. Shoals surrounded the channel, ready to trap any ship that strayed too close. Nelson proposed a bold solution. He would take a smaller force of ships of Valin and sail directly into the harbor. Parker would remain offshore with the heavier ships. Parker agreed. He gave Nelson control of the attack. The plan relied on precision. Every ship had a specific target. Timing, navigation, and discipline had to be perfect. There was no room for error. There was plenty of error. On the morning of April 2nd, 1801, Nelson advanced into King's Deep. Almost immediately, HMS Agamemnon ran aground. Soon after, Bellona followed. Then Russell joined them. 3 major ships, immobilized before the battle fully developed. This was the breaking point. A lesser commander might have ordered a retreat. Nelson adapted. He reassigned targets on the fly, shouting orders through smoke and fire. British gunnery concentrated on the southern end of the Danish line. The Danes fought with extraordinary courage. Many crews were volunteers with little training. They stayed at their guns as ships burned around them. Losses were horrific on both sides. At sea, courage matters. So does preparation. British crews fired faster and more accurately. Slowly, Danish ships began to fall silent. Offshore, Parker could see little through the smoke. He saw grounded ships signaling distress. He feared disaster. At 1:15 p.m., he made his decision. He signaled Nelson to withdraw. From Parker's perspective, this was a safety valve. Nelson could disengage without disgrace. Nelson saw it differently. He acknowledged the signal, but did not repeat it. His fleet continued firing. This was not recklessness. It was calculated defiance. Nelson judged that the Danish line was close to collapse. Withdrawal would waste lives already spent and turn a near victory into failure. The decision worked. Danish resistance crumbled. Ship after ship struck its colors, but defiance had consequences. Captain Edward Riou, commanding the British frigates near Trekroner Fort, saw Parker's signal but not Nelson's response. Believing retreat was ordered, he pulled back under devastating fire. As his ship turned, Riou was killed by a cannonball. This was the battle's tragic irony. Nelson's success depended on ignoring orders. Ryu's death resulted from obeying them. Victory came, but not cleanly. As Danish ships surrendered, some shore batteries kept firing. Nelson was furious. He drafted a blunt message, threatening to burn captured ships with their wounded crews aboard if resistance continued. It was a brutal threat. It worked. The Danish crown prince agreed to a ceasefire. This was not just a battlefield success. It was political leverage. British bomb ships remained in the harbor, their mortars a silent argument during negotiations. Then history intervened. 6 days later, news arrived that Tsar Paul of Russia had been murdered. The League of Armed Neutrality lost its driving force overnight. Denmark quietly backed away. The coalition collapsed. A massive conflict unraveled, not through another battle, but through assassination and diplomacy. Nelson was celebrated. Parker was recalled. Nelson took command of the fleet. But Copenhagen revealed something deeper than heroism. Britain won because it understood incentives. It struck early, accepted risk, and applied pressure where opponents were weak. Denmark fought bravely, but its alliance was fragile, held together by fear more than shared interest. The League failed because it tried to resist power without unity or timing. This pattern repeats. Coalitions form to resist dominant powers. Economic pressure replaces blockades. Naval choke points become supply chains and sanctions regimes. The same questions return. When do you confront power, and when do you accommodate it? How much risk is acceptable before action becomes recklessness? And how often do victories depend on someone choosing to ignore the rules at exactly the right moment? At Copenhagen, Nelson did not win because he was lucky, or reckless, or fearless. He won because he understood that waiting was the greatest danger of all. History often turns, not on perfect plans, but on flawed decisions made at the moment when hesitation becomes fatal. And sometimes, the difference between disaster and legend is simply knowing when not to see the signal.